The desert night was cruel, quiet but for the shuffle of boots and the rattle of a whiskey bottle rolling against stone. He dragged her by the arm, rough, unrelenting, a young woman barely in her 20s, her face streaked with dirt and blood. His breath reeked of liquor, his eyes burning with the madness of a man who had forgotten what it meant to be human. "Stop. Please stop," she whispered, her voice breaking against the dry wind. The outlaw, her stepfather, sneered, shoving her down into the dust. The impact forced a cough from her chest, but she bit back the cry, knowing weakness only fed his rage. He pulled a torn sack from the wagon bed, and with one swift motion yanked it over her head. Darkness, suffocation. Her world shrank to the sound of his boots grinding into gravel. "You're mine," he hissed. "Always will be." The words slithered into her ears like venom. She tried to struggle, wrists twisting in the frayed rope that bound them. But his fist silenced her, the blow splitting her lip beneath the burlap. Narration drifted like the desert wind. Cruelty leaves no room for mercy. Some men drink their souls away until only the devil's voice remains. He tethered her to the broken wheel of an abandoned wagon, the rope biting into her arms. The lantern he carried cast long shadows across the sand, turning him into a giant made of darkness. She sobbed beneath the sack, whispering again, "Please, please stop." For a moment his hand lingered on the rope, trembling. But it wasn't mercy. It was the hesitation of a coward who knew what he did was damnable, and yet still did it. The night swallowed them both. Coyotes cried in the distance. The bottle shattered against stone, its fragments glinting like stars under the moonlight. He stepped back, arms crossed, watching her tremble in silence. Then, footsteps fading. Boots crunching against dirt. He left her there, alone, bound, shackled in shadows, and as the sack pressed tight against her bruised face, her last thought before sleep claimed her was a prayer, not for herself, but for someone, anyone, to hear her cry. The first rays of dawn painted the desert in shades of gold and blood. She lay on the coarse sand, wrists raw from the rope, her hair matted, her skin blistered from the sun's relentless heat. The sack had slipped partially, letting in a sliver of light that burned her eyes and mocked her helplessness. Every breath was a battle. Dust choked her throat and thirst clawed at her belly. Her body ached, trembling with the memory of last night's cruelty. Above her, vultures circled lazily, wings cutting through the pink sky, their shadow a reminder that death lurked close. She tried to sit, to push herself upright, but her legs buckled under her. The rope cut into her arms, leaving angry red marks that burned with every movement. She groaned, a sound swallowed immediately by the vast emptiness of the desert. Narration hovered like the wind. Abandoned, alone, the world felt impossibly large, and she impossibly small. Every heartbeat was a drum of despair, every breath a whispered plea for salvation. A sudden sound, faint but distinct, reached her ears. The soft pounding of hooves on hard-packed dirt, echoing across the flat land. Her chest tightened, hope and fear warring within her. Could it be rescue or more torment? "Please," she whispered again, lips cracked and dry. "Someone, anyone." The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, resonating in the hollow silence of the desert. Dust swirled around her as a figure appeared on the horizon. A man on horseback, wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, a rifle slung across his back. He rode with purpose, his horse's hooves pounding like the rhythm of justice. In the vast, merciless desert, salvation often comes on 4 hooves and a steady hand. And sometimes, hope rides in where fear has left its mark. The rancher slowed as he neared, eyes scanning the ground. He spotted her, the rope, the sack, the bloodied dress, and his stomach twisted. Without hesitation, he swung off the horse, boots crunching against sand, and knelt beside her. He ripped the sack away, revealing her tear-streaked, sunburned face. His hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the horror of what he saw. "It's okay," he murmured gently. "You're safe now. I've got you." Her eyes wide with disbelief met his. For the first time since the night began, the desert's harsh light seemed less like death and more like the fragile promise of life. The rancher lifted her onto the horse behind him, one strong arm around her waist. The wind carried them forward, sand whipping past. And somewhere in the distance, the cries of vultures faded into silence. The ranch lay nestled in a small valley, a cluster of wooden buildings bathed in the golden light of morning. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of burning wood and fresh coffee. The rancher guided his horse along the dirt path, the young woman clinging tightly behind him, her body weak but her spirit flickering with the first glimmer of hope. Even in a land scarred by cruelty, there are places where safety still breathes, where kindness waits quietly behind weathered doors. And sometimes the world can offer more than fear. She stumbled slightly as they reached the gate, and he steadied her, strong hands gripping her arms. Dust fell from her hair, and she flinched at the warmth of the sun on her bruised skin. The rancher's eyes softened, scanning her injuries with the practiced gaze of a man who had seen too much pain but never ignored it. "Almost there," he said, voice low but firm. Just a little further. The wooden doors creaked open, revealing a modest kitchen where a woman, middle-aged with kind eyes and flour-streaked hands, looked up from preparing bread. Her gaze fell on the girl, and she immediately stepped forward, concern knitting her brow. "Get her inside," the rancher said. "She's been through hell." The young woman's heart pounded in her chest. Fear still clung to her, whispering that this was another trap, another man with cruel intentions. But the gentle tone of the rancher, the warmth of the kitchen, and the smell of bread and coffee began to melt the edge of terror. In the quiet corners of the West, refuge can be as simple as a hearth, a warm meal, and a promise that no harm will come this way. The rancher helped her into a chair by the fireplace. The housekeeper knelt, inspecting her cuts and bruises, applying salve with practiced care. Each touch was deliberate, respectful, a balm not just for her body but for the fragile trust she had lost. She whispered, voice trembling, I didn't think anyone would come." The rancher placed a steady hand on hers, firm but comforting. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you here." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, tears came, not from fear, but relief. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows across her face, illuminating the first fragile smile that had appeared since the desert night. Salvation rarely shouts. It creeps quietly through open doors and steady hands, reminding the broken that life can still be gentle. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, the hearth glowed. And for the young woman, for the first time since darkness fell, hope felt real. The warmth of the fireplace wrapped around her like a fragile shield against the cold memory of the desert night. She sat on a worn wooden chair, knees drawn close, as the rancher's housekeeper gently cleaned her cuts. Every motion was deliberate, each touch a quiet reassurance that she was no longer alone. Some wounds run deeper than skin. But even in the West, there are hands willing to soothe, voices willing to speak truth into the chaos of fear. Her eyes, wide and haunted, darted to the rancher. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his face a mix of concern and controlled anger. Silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. I didn't think I'd make it," she whispered, voice trembling. "You did," he replied, slow and steady. "And you're here. That's what matters." In a world where cruelty rides fast and justice often lags, the smallest truths can be the most powerful. You survived. You're still breathing. You're not alone, she shivered, wrapping the thin blanket around her shoulders. The housekeeper offered a bowl of warm broth, and she sipped cautiously, the heat spreading through her, igniting the tiniest flicker of hope. Her voice cracked as she spoke. He tied me up, left me, like I was nothing." The rancher's jaw tightened. "No one should ever do that to anyone. You're not nothing, and anyone who tries won't find mercy on my land." Strength isn't born from avoiding fear. It grows in the moments when despair presses hardest, and someone refuses to let you fall entirely into shadow. She swallowed hard, trying to absorb the weight of his words. Slowly, a connection began to form, a fragile trust, stitched together by quiet deeds and unwavering presence. "Thank you," she murmured, almost inaudible, as if speaking the words aloud made them more real. The rancher nodded once, eyes never leaving hers. Rest now. You'll need your strength. Tomorrow we talk about what comes next. Sometimes, the first step toward freedom isn't running from danger, but letting someone guide you back to life. The West is cruel, yes, but even here light finds a way through the cracks. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the soft promise of morning. Inside, the fire glowed warmly, and for the first time since she had been bound and abandoned, the young woman allowed herself to imagine a future not ruled by fear, but by the possibility of safety, courage, and the rare, steady presence of someone who would stand by her. The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the town in streaks of orange and crimson. Dust rose from the streets as the stepfather stomped into the mercantile, eyes scanning every corner, fists clenched. Rumors of the girl's escape had reached him faster than he anticipated, and the fire of rage burned hotter with each step. Some men cannot abide the thought of losing control. Their hearts are rusted with pride, their souls corroded by cruelty. And when they strike, the West listens, with fear in its bones. He spotted the rancher talking quietly with a merchant outside. His gaze landed on the young woman standing slightly behind, her hands pressed against her chest, as if to shield herself from the memory of last night. "She's mine," he growled, voice thick with venom. "Always has been. Always will be." The rancher's stance shifted, broad shoulders squared, jaw tight. The air between them seemed to crackle like lightning over the plains. "Not tonight," the rancher said, voice steady, low. "Not ever again." A tense silence fell. The townsfolk peeked from windows and doorways, whispers floating like dry tumbleweeds across the empty street. Horses shifted, hooves scraping the wooden boards of the saloon. Every eye followed the drama unfolding in the heat-soaked dust. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's standing when fear demands you kneel, facing the darkness with nothing but resolve as your shield. The stepfather's fingers twitched toward a revolver at his hip, but he paused, measuring the risk. The sheriff's name might not have reached him yet, but the rancher's reputation did. He knew better than to provoke the wrath of a man who had seen the worst of the West and still stood unbroken. With a final sneer, he backed down. "This isn't over," he spat, voice sharp enough to cut through the morning haze. "You'll see me again." The rancher's eyes followed him as he stomped back down the street, dust rising in angry clouds behind him. The girl's hand found his sleeve, gripping tightly, her breath still shaky from the confrontation. "It's okay," he said quietly, voice soft now. "He's gone for now. But I promise we'll be ready." In the West, evil rarely surrenders easily. But courage, when steady and true, is a beacon that can keep the darkest hearts at bay. If only for a little while. The girl exhaled slowly, relief and lingering terror mingling in her chest. Outside, the desert wind carried away the echoes of threats and anger, leaving behind only the fragile promise of safety, fleeting, but real. The sheriff rode into town just as the sun dipped behind jagged cliffs, casting long shadows across the dusty street. His horse's hooves echoed with authority, a steady rhythm that carried the promise of justice. The young woman watched from the porch of the ranch, fingers curled tightly around the railing, heart hammering in her chest. In a land ruled by grit and lawlessness, sometimes salvation wears a badge and rides with a purpose. And sometimes it arrives just when despair has dug its claws deepest. The rancher led her down the wooden steps to meet the man who carried both reputation and resolve. The sheriff dismounted, boots crunching against gravel, eyes scanning her bruised, weary face. "She's in your hands now," the rancher said, voice steady but edged with tension. "He won't stop until someone stops him." The sheriff nodded, tone gravelly and firm. "No one's going to hurt her while I draw breath." "We'll make sure he answers for what he's done." The young woman's throat tightened. She had never believed anyone could promise protection and truly mean it. Her lips trembled and she whispered, "You really mean that?" "I do," the sheriff replied. "And I've dealt with men like him before. They always regret underestimating what's coming." Hope is a quiet thing in the West, born not from flashy heroics, but from steady hands and unflinching resolve. And for the first time in weeks, She felt its warmth seeping through the cracks of fear. The rancher placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow we plan. Tonight you rest. You need strength for what's coming," she nodded, though her mind raced. Memories of the sack, the desert, and the stepfather's cruel grin threatened to drown her newfound hope. Yet standing there with two men who embodied protection and justice, she realized that she wasn't entirely powerless. The sheriff dismounted fully, resting a firm hand on the rancher's arm. "We've got deputies in town. He won't have time to gather a gang without us noticing. We'll be ready when he makes his move." In the West, law is often a fragile line between chaos and safety. But when courage and justice ride side by side, even the darkest nights can hint at dawn. The girl exhaled, letting the tension ease just slightly. Lanterns flickered inside the ranch, casting a warm glow across the floorboards. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the quiet promise of tomorrow, that evil might strike, but they would be ready. And for the first time, she dared to believe she could survive it.